Well, Stephen Heydemann is Director of Middle East Studies at Smith College. He joins us now from Northampton in Massachusetts. Professor Heydemann, good to have you with us this morning. I want to start with the latest arrivals in the region. The Marines now there, along with the USS Tripoli. We know elements of the 82nd Airborne are very nearby as well. Now, these are two very highly specialized soldiers. One, as we know, specializes in amphibious landings, the other in airborne assaults behind enemy lines. So I want to know, what are you hearing about them? I mean, are there indicators which are unambiguous suggesting a ground invasion, or is this more, for show at the moment?
Well, that's a good question. The indicators remain quite uncertain. It does seem as if President Trump is giving himself the option of initiating a ground operation, either, as you mentioned, an amphibious operation or an operation focused on retrieving the enriched uranium that remains inside Iran. But whether or not he'll actually go through with that, whether he'll implement that option, remains quite uncertain. And it's entirely possible that deploying those forces into the region is intended as a show of force that might persuade Iran to adopt a more conciliatory attitude toward opening the Straits of Hormuz, or toward a settlement of the conflict that would incorporate some of President Trump's demands. Considering how unlikely that is, the real concern here in Washington, I think, in the U.S., is that President Trump might find himself backed into a corner in which he has threatened the use of ground forces and is then compelled to make use of those forces to avoid being seen as backing down. And so this is actually, I think, a very dangerous moment in the course of this conflict.
And Professor, we were saying Iran's rhetoric hardening. It's targeting, warning U.S. troops, that there'll be, and I'm quoting, good food for the sharks of the Persian Gulf if they set foot on Iranian soil. I mean, at what point does Mr. Trump, do you think, will pull that trigger? And if he does, can Tehran actually back up its threats?
Well, we're in the middle of a waiting period at the moment. President Trump initially demanded the immediate reopening of the Straits of Hormuz. He then extended the deadline by 5 days and then extended it again. And so I think we have a period of time before we'll get a clearer sense of what his intentions are. The rhetoric has been escalating on all sides of this conflict. Israel has expressed its determination to continue attacking Iran at a very high level, which it did this weekend. And the U.S. has also continued to talk about its intentions in quite maximalist ways. So we haven't seen any real calming of the waters. At times, President Trump makes an effort to calm global markets, to calm the American stock markets. Those have not been successful. And so we're really in this moment in which what the next stage of this conflict might look like remains to be seen. But if a ground operation is launched, I think we have to be aware of how vulnerable U.S. forces would be if they were to actually try to conduct land operations in Iran, because the numbers of troops that the U.S. has deployed into the region are really much too small for anything but a very, very small surgical operation.
And amid the uncertainty, the conflict seems to be widening. The Houthis have now formally entered this war. Analysts are warning about it potentially blocking the second maritime choke point. I mean, if they were to do that, how does that change this war?
Well, it would amplify the economic effects of the war. It would make it even more difficult to maintain the global shipping routes that flow around the Horn into the Red Sea through the Suez Canal. They were disrupted in previous episodes of conflict and at huge cost to the global economy. And that could well happen again. So far, it's quite interesting that the Houthis have not exercised that option. They have not taken steps to try to take action against shipping lanes in their coastal waters. They have targeted Israel, but they have not gone beyond that. And it suggests that the Houthis are calibrating fairly carefully how deeply they want to be involved in this conflict.
And Professor, I do want to confirm that the Houthis, if they choose to have the capabilities, I mean, we know the Iranians have speedboats, lots of mines, land-to-sea missiles, and so forth. Do the Houthis, have the same capabilities, or is the threat alone, you think, enough to bring all traffic at the Bab al-Mandeb to a halt?
Well, I think first, the Houthis do have the capacity. They have ballistic missiles, they have drones, they have weapons that give them the capability of disrupting shipping. But you're quite right to point out that the threat of disruption may be sufficient to bring shipping almost to a halt. We've seen that in the Straits of Hormuz. It is principally the threat that Iran might take action, might attack shipping that moves through the straits, that has led to an almost complete shutdown of movement through those straits. So in some respects, it would be enough, perhaps, for the Houthi leadership to make clear that they intended to disrupt shipping lanes for them to achieve the result that they set out to achieve.
Professor, there are also tentative signs of diplomacy. Pakistan says it's ready to host U.S.-Iran talks in coming days, but given Iran's conditions, including the sovereignty over Hormuz and war reparation, is there actually a deal to be made here?
I don't think we're anywhere close to a negotiated outcome of this conflict. As you point out, Iranian demands are quite extraordinary in their scope. None of the countries that rely on the Straits of Hormuz would accept Iranian sovereignty over the Straits, and the U.S., I suspect most other countries in the world would not do so either. It's an international waterway, and I think a basic condition for a resolution of the conflict is that its status as an international waterway has to be respected and upheld by all of the countries on the strait. Beyond that, of course, the U.S. has also presented Iran with demands, and those too are quite extensive in their scope. And so until we have an opportunity to see where there might be possibilities for the two sides to find some sort of common ground, which frankly now seems very remote, I can't see a way toward a negotiated outcome just yet.
Professor, in the meantime, I wonder if you think sentiment, plays a role here. Most polls suggesting that a majority of Americans do not approve of the war. But I'm wondering, in the region itself, do you know how Iranians feel about it? Do you know how the neighbors of Iran, in terms of ordinary people, feel about it? And is it going to make a difference?
I'm not sure how Iranians feel about the war. I suspect that Iran is deeply divided. The Iranian regime is enormously unpopular domestically. We saw that in the month before the war began with the large protests against the regime that were put down with extraordinary violence, thousands of Iranians killed. So there are many Iranians who I suspect are hoping that this conflict might further weaken the regime, leave it more vulnerable in ways that might lead to a change, if not in the course of the conflict, then perhaps in the months or years after this conflict comes to an end. In the Gulf region, there's also been an interesting reaction because one sort of imagined that the attacks on targets in all 6 of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries might have caused tensions between those countries and the U.S. They were targeted in large part because they are allies of the U.S. But in fact, what we're hearing is that much of the anger about the effects of the conflict is being directed toward the Iranians, and that the GCC states are now increasingly persuaded that it's important to inflict enough damage on Iran in this conflict that it can no longer pose a threat to those countries in the future. And so we've seen the leadership in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates make public appeals to President Trump not to bring the conflict to a close prematurely. And that's, I think, a very interesting position for these governments to take.
Okay, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you so much for your insight this morning. Professor Stephen Heydemann, Director of Middle East Studies at Smith College.